What's up, everyone? Welcome back to A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers, the podcast. From Grind City Media, we're coming to you live here from the Built for Tough studio in Memphis, Tennessee. I am Lang Whitaker. He is my friend Russ Bankston, and Russ just wrote this book, A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers. At this point, he wrote it a while ago, though. And we're working our way through this book, talking about each chapter and talking about each sneaker and basketball and all these different things. We made it to chapter 9, and the book, chapter 8. And we're going to talk about role models a little bit. We're going to talk about the Nike Air Force Max, and this is one of the few shoes we don't actually have here in the studio, so I thought I'd hold up the book so you could get a look at it. That's kind of known, I guess, mostly as the Charles Barkley shoe.
Yeah. I mean, it was designed for Charles Barkley.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I don't know, I look at this shoe as like being a group effort, and it's kind of like how Nike worked that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
You know, you had Steve McDonald, who was the designer, and then you had Whiten and Kennedy doing all the commercials for it, and then obviously you had Charles.
Yeah.
But the commercials are a super crazy part of that because like the director was this guy you might have heard of called David Fincher.
Yeah.
You know, doing like 30-second or 60-second Nike spots. Like,
who later did like Seven, Fight Club, a bunch of like crazy, like huge movies, the Facebook movie, whatever it is, Social Network.
Yeah, I never saw that. But I mean, just even the way like his jump cuts are and the music is, like you can kind of see it in his older commercial work. And, you know, obviously Charles being Charles. And Charles was one of the guys who Nike signed when they signed Jordan back in '84 from that same draft. And he turned out pretty good too.
Yeah.
And by then it was kind of getting into the idea that like, okay, maybe Charles is a signature level guy.
Yeah.
Although they'd just gotten into it. And Steve McDonald, who did a lot of shoes, and I think like he unfortunately ends up a little bit behind like, you know, Tinker and Avar and guys like that. But Steve was a skier. So it's like he knew about support and designing stuff that would, you know, hold up like that. And he was also instrumental in early ACG, like all conditions gear boots.
Yeah.
So he was doing rugged. And it's like, who better to do a shoe for Charles Barkley?
Yeah. Because Charles, you know, coming out of Auburn, he was, I mean, I think he was listed at like 6'6" or whatever, but he was probably like 6'4". Like he was smaller than he was listed. Everybody is. Known as the round mound of rebound coming out of Auburn. And then he gets to the Sixers where he gets teamed up with Moses Malone and Dr. J. And pretty early on, it was clear that Charles was different than maybe anyone we'd ever seen before. Like he was incredibly athletic, but he could score, he could rebound, he could block shots. I was really glad as I read your book, Russ, that you mentioned the NBA Superstars video. And this actually came up at dinner last night of all the things. Charles's video was set to Scandal featuring Patti Smythe doing The Warrior. Which is one of the great songs of all time. My friends and I had this VHS tape when we were kids, and we watched that thing. I think that was NBA Superstars Volume 2, actually.
No, that one was one. That was one. Barkley,
Which one was 2? Was that the one with Sean Kemp?
2 was a bunch of guys from
had a
like,
Pearl Jam song with Sean Kemp.
That was like a lot of the Dream Team 2 guys. That was like Kemp and Larry Johnson and them.
Yeah. I had actually, so my friends and I watched it so much growing up that we had it memorized. Like, there was a bad Dominique video in there with a song from Yanni. There was all these weird songs.
There was an Enya song, I think, or maybe it was Enya.
I think
there was both.
I'm pretty sure Yanni was that one. Dr. J had a Whitney Houston song, "The Greatest Love of All." And somebody else had somebody had a Billy Joel, "This Is the Time to Remember."
I think that was like the old guys, like when they showed like Bob Cousy and Bill Russell and them. Jordan was to
"Take My Breath Away" by
the
Berlin.
love theme from Top Gun.
Yeah.
The best one though, I mean, Barkley was my favorite video clip because like they show him shooting free throws with like a huge black eye, but
and like throwing the ball at people.
Akeem Olajuwon pre-aging his name to "How You Like Me Now" by Kool Moe Dee.
Well, Magic Johnson was Janet Jackson "Control." In that video.
And Larry Bird was Small Town John Cougar, pre-Mellencamp.
Actually, a couple of years ago when I worked at NBA TV, I did this road trip with Sekou Smith and Rick Fox, and the bus we were on had a VHS, or maybe it was a DVD player, but it had something, and we lived on this bus for like 2 weeks, and you know we were really bored all the time. But we stopped at this Walmart in the middle of Indiana, and they had NBA Superstars on DVD, and I made Rick Fox watch it, and he had never seen it before.
No
and,
way.
Yeah,
oh my
like
God.
he had like played against most of those guys or with some of them, and I got him to respect the video. But anyway, but Charles really was different when he got to the NBA and was so good and so unique and just fun to watch. Like,
yeah,
the personality that everyone knows from him now as a TNT guy, like it was there, but it was just like athletic, I guess, when he was playing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and also like I feel like the early days of Barkley with the Sixers, you know, it's like maybe they weren't on national TV as much, and it's like they weren't very good after Doc retired and before Charles got traded to Phoenix. So, you know, you wouldn't have seen him as much. He was probably a little overshadowed by Jordan. But I mean, good Lord, like talk about personality. You know, it's like I'm sure you had your stories with him too. I mean, I remember back in the Slam days, I went to Houston to do a story, and I forgot who I was even writing it on at that point. I think I had done a Pippen story, and he like didn't talk to me. That didn't go well. But one day I'm like outside waiting for the Rockets locker room to open up, or maybe just inside, and Barkley was late. And he walks in the door and sees me there and is like, "You again? Like, why don't you just go home?" And I was like, "Oh man, Charles." Like, and this was in the day when they would leave, and this sounds like the dark ages, but it kind of is. Like, he would grab like 2 22-ounce beers on his way out of the locker room. Like, you know, obviously pre-social media, pre-nutritionists, I guess.
Well, you wrote in the book, Charles lived his life a quarter pounder at a time, which I thought was,
which I feel is kind of glib, but I mean, you know, he sort of did. True. They did like a shoot with him back, like a Sports Illustrated shoot at Auburn, and like he's got a whole pizza.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, you know, I think he kind of leaned into it a little bit. You know, I don't know if he was ever as
he wasn't as like just
big
like,
as people said. And like, I mean, maybe he did like towards the end with Houston.
Could he have been in better shape? Sure.
Right.
Did it really hinder him that much? I don't think so.
I mean, you don't lead the league in rebounding when you're like literally 6'4" or 6'5" unless you can jump out the gym. Which
he averaged double figures rebounding all but 1 year of his career. And the only year he didn't was when he was a rookie, and he averaged 8.6 per game. Like, you know.
And I mean, this shoe, I think, you know, I looked at this shoe as like, it was kind of pre-actual signature. Like the next one was the Air Force Max CB, which actually had his number and like a cross strap. But this one kind of came out when he got dealt to Phoenix. You know, he arrives in Phoenix and wins MVP that year, makes it to the finals against Jordan. You know, they lost the finals, but they won a game in Chicago like, because they boarded up all the windows basically. And Charles was like, "Oh, hell no. Like, at least I'm going to stop this." And that's when he does that role model commercial. Yeah. And you know, Jim Riswold.
I just noticed the line in your book where you say he lived his life a quarter pounder at a time. The name of that section is Boy Gorge.
That was one of his nicknames. He had a ton of like wild nicknames like that. I mean, the round mound to rebound is the one that really
they called Mel Turpin the round mound of too many pounds at the same time. But the role model commercial was like, I guess that's as tied to this whole era as anything. And that's one of the things that still sort of resonates today. You know, that line, "I am not a role model," like that became such an iconic phrase.
And it was also like, that was almost a bridge commercial, because like Nike had done all these ads before that, like, you know, were just kind of a guy, a ball in a gym. Yeah. And you had that aspect of it. And I think there was a whole series of commercials like that. There was a Jordan one where he's at the free throw line and he's talking about like, you know, can you imagine and stuff like that. Like, so it's very like almost introspective, but you feel like Charles is inside his head voice is probably just as loud. And Jim Riswold, I spoke to him about it, and, you know, I think he did almost too good a job. Like, he wrote that commercial for being Charles's voice, and Charles kind of eventually kind of took it as his own. Yeah. But I mean, that's why, like, you know, he was very good at literally putting words in athletes' mouths that would seem like it's something they would say.
Well, and maybe in some ways he was able to sort of like channel and put into words his inner monologue that Charles didn't really know how to voice in a way that was so succinct and clear and everything. He kind of came up with Charles's mission statement accidentally.
He's almost an editor.
Yeah.
Like, there's a story Jim tells about writing a Jordan commercial, and this is when he was off playing, or when he was coming back after playing baseball.
Yeah.
And Mike had to approve everything. And Jordan calls him and is like, "Why you call me a weak-hitting outfielder?" or something along those lines. And Jim came back with, "Well, what else would you call yourself?" And apparently there was silence on the phone for a minute, and he was just like, "F you, I'll say it."
Yeah.
And he ended up doing the commercial. But it's like, another reason I really wanted to do this shoe is because not only did you have Charles Barkley, but this was the rise of the Fab Five.
Yeah.
And, we talked about it a little bit off the air. Like, the first shoe they sort of popularized was the Flight Huarache.
Yeah, which was like not even the Michigan colors, which was that's kind of what was cool about it. It was like blue and purple.
Yeah.
And it popped so much against those yellow uniforms.
And that's, to me, like, I've done Nike ID shoes in the past, and I've used that blue-purple combination because I think it's so, like, iconic to the Flight. But that, I think, like, they hadn't quite developed the full Fab Five look yet.
Yeah.
To me, like, that was when, like, Chris Webber still had a bit of a high-top fade, and, like, they were still wearing white socks.
Yeah.
So you had that first season, and they make it all the way through and, like, lose.
Yeah.
But they come back for that second season, and I think that's when they really came into their own even. And it's like, obviously they're starters from the beginning.
Yeah.
They make it to the championship game against North Carolina. You have the ill-fated timeout
from CeeLo.
But to me, that's still I'm going to say iconic again. I hate myself for doing that.
But it was and they were like, there's a picture in your book of Larry Johnson and UNLV, and like, I was thinking of it almost at the time, like there was Duke, and everybody hated Duke, right? Because like Duke was like the dynasty that nobody could topple, blah blah blah. And then you had UNLV who comes up and then competes with Duke and is great and all this stuff. And then Michigan comes up and you're like, oh, maybe these would be the guys who can beat them. You mentioned the black socks with Michigan. And to me, like, I actually made a note in here, like that's the first time I remember black socks being, like, first time I remember anything other than white socks in basketball, really. And now, like, there's all these crazy socks and colors and designs and all this crap. But like, I'd never seen people wear black shoes and black socks before when Michigan came out, and I was like, oh, I guess I got to get some black socks.
And it's kind of like that Fab Five team, I think, influenced even like pro basketball. Because you eventually had like the Knicks shaving their heads. I mean, except for like Ewing, who said no, and the shorts. Like, they wore the big baggy shorts, and the NBA at the time was still like the nutbusters that Stockton had on. Right, like maybe Jordan had his a little bit longer, but like it was
nothing
only,
like the Michigan
really
ones.
Him.
Yeah, the Michigans were like a costume, like they were just giant.
Right, and like I think like you had like them as freshmen going in and being like talking to the center, who was like Eric Riley or someone like that, being like, no, we're taking your shorts because they're bigger.
Yeah.
But that's the iconic Michigan look for me, was like bald heads, the maize and blue uniform, black socks, and the Air Force Max.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of that, revisiting a lot of that Michigan stuff was from Mitch Albom's book.
Yeah.
The 5 people you'll meet in Ann Arbor.
Chris Webber, Joe and Rose, Jimmy King,
Ray Jackson. But like, that was just such a classic thing for me. Yeah. And then I did look at UNLV, and it's like, oh yeah, UNLV was rocking the black Nikes. Yeah. They had kind of baggy shorts. They were more of the junior college guys, because Tark was always picking from
all those JUCO guys who, like, Augman, and LJ was a JUCO guy. Yeah.
Right. I mean, guys from the edges. Yeah. And it's funny because Stacey Augman ends up becoming one of Sonny Vaccaro's first Adidas guys.
Yeah.
After Sonny had left Nike. And Jalen, when he leaves Michigan after his junior season, he also went with Sonny and became an Adidas guy.
Yeah.
So he wore like the Adidas Rat Ball, which is still one of my favorite names for a shoe. But
I was thinking about Charles and in the context of the book and in the context of just the NBA, or I guess even basketball writ large. And like, I feel like Charles was in some ways like one of the pioneers of like positionless basketball, because he shot threes and you were like, why is this front court guy shooting threes? And at the time, nobody did that. When he was on Phoenix, he would jack up these threes during the games. And
if you look at Charles's shooting percentage, you can also ask, why is he shooting threes?
He was terrible at it, but he did shoot them, and he could dunk on you, he could take you outside, he could dribble up the court, he could do everything. And Weber kind of came along and was sort of similar in a lot of ways, like like all those guys. And nowadays, if you're a 7-footer, you can dribble between your legs and go up and down the court, whatever. Yeah. But at the time, like I remember, to me, Charles was one of the first to play like that. And then, UNLV, a lot of those guys were able to do lots of different things and play different positions and all that, and you could kind of mix and match. And I feel like the Fab Five, UNLV, all those guys sort of, clearly they had been playing for a long time, but all those guys kind of came along and had this experience together and sort of changed basketball in that way.
I think in that era, also in like UNLV, obviously with the Running Rebels and like just the idea of pushing the pace, like if you're going to push the pace, you need everyone to be able to handle the ball and everyone to be able to finish. And I think also with Barkley, though, you look at him coming up as kind of the fat kid on his high school team. It's probably like, if you want the ball, you better go get it.
Yeah.
And it's like when he was young on the Sixers, I think like, the idea was still like, we'll give it to the point guard.
Yeah.
But if Charles Barkley gave the ball to Mo Cheeks, on the other end, Mo's going to be looking for Dr. J.
Yeah.
And if the ball comes off the rim, well, that's Moses going to go get that.
Yeah.
So if you're Charles, like if you get a defensive board, like, and you can push it and finish yourself, that's probably the way to do it.
Yeah.
Michigan is interesting because it's like you had Jalen, Chris, and Juwan, who are all around the same height. Like they're all roughly 6'9", 6'8". But like you did have them being pretty separate guys. Jalen was clearly the point guard.
Yeah.
Juwan was clearly a post guy.
Yeah.
Chris was more the one who would like
mix and
run the floor and disrupt. But you are looking at that as being more of a modern basketball.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of feel like this shoe doesn't really get the memory it deserves, like the Air Force Max. Like we're talking about now, but like a lot of these other shoes have been retroed to death and different colorways and all these other things. And that one sort of kind of, to me, is a little under the radar still and underrated.
They've brought it back. I think it's difficult. Especially now, like I feel like almost every shoe that gets brought back has to have some Jordan connection to it.
It's not really a fashion shoe either. It feels like it's a big shoe and it's kind of heavy and it's not like something you would just wear with shorts.
It's kind of rugged. You could wear it with Michigan shorts, I feel like, or Sun shorts, but it kind of goes with baggy jeans and like that whole aspect of it. You have to look like you're in Onyx.
Do you remember? I think it was Nate Robinson told us he like ordered them on eBay to wear when he played on the Knicks.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah,
that wouldn't surprise me.
But like I don't see a lot of other players wearing them anymore.
But I think also it's almost a positionless shoe to a degree. I think like even after they did more stuff that like, separating it into force and flight and around the same time, like guards and forwards. But that shoe is kind of like, with its cut, because it's not that high.
Yep.
Like, it's bulky and it has the strap. But it's like, that's still a shoe to run the floor in instead of like just to post up.
Yeah. But I don't know. Maybe that'll be one of those shoes that we eventually see brought back and given a push to some degree.
They'll always try. They'll always try. I think you could do more even with the whole Michigan stuff. Like, and I kind of wondered, like,
now that those guys are like back, welcome also.
Thankfully.
Like,
I kind of wondered like what it would be like even with Michigan if they had like the same sort of NIL deals. Like
they did have NIL deals. They just weren't allowed to.
Oh man.
Basically, that's really what it was.
A little bit. But Jalen told me like he didn't even have one of his own jerseys to keep until long after when a booster offered it to him. And it's like, that's kind of not fair. Like those guys are the ones making it popular.
Yeah.
I had like a Chris Webber jersey I bought later that was like a Russell Athletics that had his name on it. You know, like.
Yeah. But, now you could get them. Now you can.
You can.
It would be cool if you could actually get them. So, all right. That takes us through, for our purposes, Chapter 9 of the podcast. Chapter 10 is coming up next. And we're going to talk about a shoe that was almost sort of a one and done. And another shoe that actually we could not find. We don't have. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Come back, listen to chapter 10. He's Russ. I'm Lang. You're listening to A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers, the podcast. And go buy Russ's book. It's in stores now. See you there.
If you're looking for even more sneaker culture content, check out The Sneak Fest Show with me, Kelsey Ray Johnson, Sherman, Adam, and Jerry, live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Grind City Media YouTube and the brand new Grind City Media app.